Hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Headlines / The Most Censored News. I'm Lee Camp, the most censored comedian in America. Thanks for joining me. I have today as a guest Wyatt Reed. He's a journalist who works for Sputnik and has worked for other outlets as well as the Gray Zone. And he ended up on Ukraine's notorious hit list, as people like to call it, of journalists that they think are that they've declared are information terrorists. And soon thereafter, his hotel was bombed. And so we'll be talking about that as well as a lot of updates on Ukraine. And yeah, make sure to hit like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And let's get to it. Please welcome Wyatt Reed.
Hello, hey, hello. Hey, Lee. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So I know it's been a few weeks, but I feel like that probably gave you time to process everything and figure out how you feel about it and everything. If you could just, I guess, if we could just start off by you walking through, what brought you to Ukraine and how you ended up on the Ukrainian hit list.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been, I think now it's been about over a month, closer to 2. So yeah, it's been good. I've settled a little bit. I no longer jump at loud noises, so that's good.
I was actually going to ask, I might show on the side your video from outside that night, but I won't show it if it gives you flashbacks, because
no. You can.
I know that I was in the closest thing I can relate to is I was in the middle of when the woman got killed in Charlottesville, Heather Heyer, and I was right next to it. And every time the news would show that fucking clip of the car driving through everybody, I'd like.
I was actually there too. I didn't realize
were?
you. Yeah. I jumped out of the way of that car and was like.
Really? Okay, because I think I didn't know you then, but I saw Alex like a minute after.
Yeah, Alex. I did an interview with of all people, Chuck Modi, in like the immediate aftermath of that, and I didn't meet him again for several years later. And then he's like, "Wait, months later, we realized that we had actually met." Years before.
So I don't know. I mean, this is speaking to to how PTSD works in these situations and everything. I don't know if you had trouble watching that clip, but they would show it on the news just constantly, and I just.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. I mean, I guess not to get too sidetracked here, but just being around that and in the immediate aftermath. And I remember too, there were like some of these kitted up soldier guys who were standing around in the immediate aftermath, and they were like joking about how if she didn't want to get hit, she shouldn't have been in the street, kind of thing. And I remember getting really, really pissed and having to be kind of held back from like getting up in these guys' faces at the time. It was very, very strange just that somebody would be able to like make light of something that horrifying in the immediate aftermath. I felt pretty similar though. Yeah, I didn't like to see that again for a while. And when I went back months later, I kind of broke down and at that site.
Mm-hmm.
There's a makeshift memorial there, and it was kind of a lot of emotions that I hadn't processed that I was able to kind of work through, I think, at that time. And yeah, I guess I feel a little bit similarly about the situation in Donetsk, although I don't really feel. It's almost kind of surreal, you know what I mean? It felt like a little bit like a dream when it happened. Mm-hmm. It's still, it freaks me out for sure. Being 100 meters from an artillery strike is not a pleasant feeling. I wouldn't recommend it. Wouldn't wish it on just about anybody. But I'm able to see that. If you want to show the audience at some point, it won't.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to play the audio because we can get the information from you here now. But I just thought I'd show silently while we're speaking some of the footage.
Sure.
Yeah. So to back up some, how did you end up in Ukraine and end up on the hit list?
Right. I ended up going to Russia in late September. I flew to Moscow via Istanbul, and I went to cover the referendums that were being held in 4 regions in Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Lugansk. about realigning with the Russian Federation. All four of those regions did vote. A majority of the people in those regions did vote to do so. We can kind of debate the merits of holding a referendum in this kind of war situation when hostilities are ongoing and there is displacement. Obviously, there is a legitimate debate to be held about to what extent it is possible to fully capture the sentiments of the people there during those kinds of circumstances. But regardless of all that, those people who did go out to vote, the majority in each of those regions did vote for realignment with the Russian Federation. So I was there, and I think September 26th or so, I arrived, and basically immediately within hours of having arrived in territory that the Ukrainian regime considers occupied territory by the Russians, in Crimea, right? I was placed on this list. It's called Mirotvorets. It means peacemaker in Ukrainian. Very dystopian
Very
name.
Orwellian, yeah.
Yeah, and I was accused of committing crimes against the Ukrainian state, of attempting to delegitimize their government, and placed on an official enemy of the state list. That's how the Mirotvorets works. It is used by immigration officers when they're reviewing who is allowed to go into the country, and it's also used in judicial proceedings. It's been used as evidence in hundreds of cases within the Ukrainian court system. So it is an official list. It was created, one of the founders is a man named Anton Goroshenko. He is a top interior ministry advisor. He's an official of the Kiev regime. He has openly bragged about having created this list. So, for all intents and purposes, it's an official kill list. It's, we don't even need to say semi-official. It's functionally an official kill list. And then within a couple weeks, after having participated in kind of observing and witnessing these elections, I decided, well, I'm already in Russia. I'd like to go see more of the conflict. I'd like to get closer to the front while I can. And I decided, okay, what's the best place to go here would be either Kherson, where there was a lot of fighting, or Donetsk, where there's also a lot of fighting, but a little bit safer from my perspective, from my boss's perspective. It turned out we may not have been 100% right about that, because
Right.
about 2 hours after arriving in Donetsk, maybe an hour after I checked into my hotel, and 45 minutes after I communicated my location to a colleague of mine in Donetsk, I went out to go try to find some dinner. And on my way back, as I'm about 100 meters away from the front door of my hotel, a massive explosion happened directly in front of me. I screamed out, "Holy shit!" I pulled out my phone and I just, tried to take cover, and I started recording. And so the video that's the pinned tweet on my Twitter account, that will show you kind of the immediate aftermath of, so this is the second video that I posted where I'm kind of explaining. This video is from about 30 minutes after, when I decided, okay, it's probably safe, probably not going to get hit by a follow-up strike. So I went out and I wanted to document the destruction and explain the situation. But the preceding video you can see is the immediate aftermath. You can see smoke rising. You can hear glass crunching. You hear car alarms going off. Right before, as it happened, I kind of hit the dirt. There's glass shattering in all the buildings around me from the pressure of this artillery strike, just knocking out windows. So there's glass falling all around me. It's, like I said, pretty terrifying. And honestly, if you want to put on the audio, you can do that. It's a short video.
Okay. We'll go ahead and do that.
Sure.
Just had an artillery strike here. experiencing that? Right outside my hotel.
So you can see that the smoke
Holy
is starting to dissipate there.
Holy shit.
But that strike was
Holy
right there
fuck.
in the corner, right next to where that flashing blue light is. It was slightly to the
Holy
left,
shit.
probably about 5-10 meters. Took out the bottom floor of a building there, really devastated the building. Luckily, no one was in the immediate vicinity. There were no injuries, which is, a huge, huge blessing. You can hear just from my language. I really didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
I was not in my most poised moment there. And here, here in about a second, you'll see I was waiting. I was worried that they were going to follow up and do what's called a double tap, basically strike the same location, seconds or minutes later in an effort to take out the first responders and, survivors as well, potentially police officers or anybody who's coming to the scene to make sure people are all right. So that was my concern. So I wanted to wait for a minute to make sure that wasn't going to happen. And then
Right.
you see me here just sprinting as fast as I can into the hotel lobby. And
I don't
I
know
got
if you
inside.
know, or have you, maybe someone has suggested how accurate these missiles can be and whether this was intentional. Did it intentionally miss the hotel as kind of a warning?
It's hard to say. It's also geographically, from the way the hotel is situated, there's not really a way for them to score a direct hit on the building. Because so if you understand, like where this camera is positioned right now, we are looking east. We're facing east. So that means behind me is the west. So all the artillery shells are being launched in basically forward in the direction that this camera is pointing right now. They don't have this they haven't captured the territory that would allow them to shell from the north, right? They or from the south, so they wouldn't be able to score like a direct hit on the building. Most of that property of that the hotel there, the Donbass Palace, it faces east. They really aren't able to score. They aren't able to shoot artillery directly into it. If they wanted to, they could potentially use a HIMARS and blow up that building. That would be really their only real way of hitting the building directly. As it is, when they're using the artillery shells, and in this case, I found out later it was a 155 millimeter, that is to say, a NATO standard shell that was used on this hotel. So they whether this was a warning, whether this was an effort to attack me personally as opposed to the rest of the journalists, because this is a hotel, I should note, that is known for hosting international journalists. There were 3 or 4 other journalists there while I was staying there that night. So it's impossible for me to say 100% for sure that they were targeting me specifically. It certainly felt that way at the time. And even later, just given the timing of it, it certainly seemed probably harder to believe that it wasn't on purpose.
Right.
But I don't have a crystal ball, and I certainly don't have a direct means of communicating with the people who carried out this strike. I don't think I even want to necessarily. But it certainly felt that way. They are fairly accurate. They've gotten significantly more accurate since February, since they started being given equipment upgrades, since they started having NATO basically deck them out with all these kind of electronic navigation surveillance equipment, all this stuff that they've been able to use to really hone in a lot better and improve their accuracy. So certainly this strike was targeted at this area. We're talking about a margin of error of feet and meters, not kilometers.
Right.
There is no question in my mind that this was an intentional effort to target a civilian area. Almost certainly definitely an effort to target journalists, Whether it was an effort to target me personally, I simply can't say, although I strongly suspect it.
If it were me, I'd probably immediately leave Ukraine. But did you stay?
Well, I figured
I would not be brave enough to be the guy who's like, you want me? Come and get me. But
honestly, it was like every day now that I stay there is kind of like a middle finger to the people that want to kill me. It's like, well, you missed. You didn't get me yet. Not dead yet, motherfuckers. That's kind of
right.
how I felt about the situation. And to be fair, my thinking was, okay, if they try it again, well, now that's confirmation. Now I know for sure that they want to kill me. The other thinking was basically that I have come here for a specific purpose, right? I've come here to show what the mainstream media won't, and I've also come here to tell the stories of the people who have been living with this kind of constant bombardment for almost 9 years now. And so to me, that is part of the story. I had hoped to tell it from an observer position rather than, as being the subject
Right.
of this, terror bombing. I don't think there's really any other way to describe it. But that's part of the story, and it happens to everyone. So I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay and continue to show what's happening. I didn't want to run away with my tail between my legs, but
So
it was pretty nerve-wracking.
While you were staying there, what did you find speaking to Ukrainians? I mean, obviously you were in a specific area, so it doesn't mean, it doesn't, those Ukrainians don't speak for all Ukrainians, but
Sure.
what did you find?
Well, in the immediate aftermath of that bombing, I kind of went back inside the hotel, and I was hanging out with hotel staff and with some other journalists and people who staying there, other guests. And they basically, one of them told me, welcome to Donetsk. You survived your consecration by fire. Now you're one of us. Now you understand what it's like. And that was kind of the attitude that I got from most people that I talked to. People just kind of have to live with this. It's just part of everyday life. And, talking to other people there, other journalists, and just average citizens, you hear that this is kind of just a part of daily life. People will have, a strike like this happen in the immediate vicinity of them. I have a good colleague named Johnny Miller who works with Press TV, who's been there for months, at least 6 months now. And he told me all kinds of stories about just going to the scenes of these kind of scenes of devastation and finding right across the street normal residents of Donetsk who are just waiting in line for a bus, and there'll be a body on the other side of the street, but they just, they got to go to work, they got to go home, they have to continue with their lives. And so there's a lot of deep loathing, really, for the Kiev regime, for Zelensky and company. But it's not reflected in a general hatred for all Ukrainians, because many of the people in these regions, especially Donetsk and Lugansk, still in some sense, you'll talk to some of them and they'll refer to themselves as Ukrainians sometimes. A lot of them now don't. A lot of them are just like, well, I'm a Russian, because what does it mean to be a Ukrainian in the widely understood sense internationally? It means to be kind of part of the Western Ukrainians, right? The Kiev side. It does not mean to be part of Donetsk, Lugansk. It does not mean to have this kind of complicated identity where, part of your home is here, but your loyalties are here. You like speaking Russian, you like Russian music. Your heroes are Russian. You support the Red Army in the World War II kind of narrative. In Western Ukraine, that's different.
Actually, if we can get a little deeper into that, some people don't. I think most people have learned it during this conflict since February a little bit. But if you could go into, you said there's been fighting there over the past 9 years. So this is far longer than February. And it goes back to 2014. if you could explain that to people and why many of these people in Donbass and some other areas view themselves as Russian and not Ukrainian.
Yeah, no, it's an important point. In 2014, there was a coup d'etat sponsored by the United States government in very open terms. They certainly were not hiding the fact that they were involved in this, but it's called the Maidan, depending on your side, either the Maidan Revolution or the Maidan coup. I'm certainly somebody who's more sympathetic to the narrative that it's a coup, because they did overthrow an elected president, right? Democratically elected president. They replaced him with someone who was not democratically elected, and there are tapes, leaked recordings of the time between the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Wyatt, and a top-level State Department official named Victoria Nuland, in which they say, well, a number of pretty undiplomatic things, including "fuck the EU," describing that this is basically who is going to lead Ukraine. That's a decision for the United States, not for the European Union. And they also say
listing who it was that was going to.
Yats is the guy. They said Yats is the guy. Yeah. So they basically plan out. They say, oh, it's better for us, for the United States, to have this particular political figure in the presidency, and to have these other two guys working from the outside. That will be optimal for United States interests, whatever that means. So this was very much a coup, and in the immediate aftermath, first of all, there were over 100 people killed just in the Maidan area alone. Subsequent investigations have revealed that this was almost certainly carried out by pro-Kiev, pro-coup forces, and that they basically they killed their own supporters in an effort to blame the police and the government at the time. There is an ongoing court case in Ukraine that is overwhelmingly proved at this point. I think viewers can look that up and get a sense of it for themselves. But there was a lot of really sneaky, kind of horrifying tactics being utilized by the pro-coup forces. And in the aftermath of this coup, people in eastern Ukraine saw what was happening to what they would call Russian sympathizers, to people whose heart, still kind of belongs with that side of the border, who consider themselves Russian on some level, or just are sympathetic to the Russian side or have family there. It's a complicated situation in some senses, and people have mixed loyalties, but they were seeing what was happening in Odessa, right?
Yeah.
They were seeing what was
one thing
Odessa.
that helped clarify it for me, because I'm not like a historian or anything, but was I read this interview with a Ukrainian as they were evacuating to Russia, and this is a family that wanted to evacuate to Russia, and they basically said, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. We viewed ourselves as part of the Soviet Union. Then there's a border there that we don't think much about. We go back and forth across it all day long. Maybe we work on one side, family on the other side, whatever. And then slowly that border between Ukraine and Russia, and, after 91, becomes a solidified, this is different countries, and now we're at each other's throats border. And all of a sudden we're on it, we're told we're Ukrainians, and it's like, no, I'm Russian. My family's over in Russia. And so it's like the border became more and more solidified, and these people got stuck in the middle.
Right. And just to finish my point, I guess the people in these regions were seeing what was happening to people like them, who had some kind of mixed loyalty, who weren't 100% rah pro-Ukraine. They were seeing what was happening in cities like Odessa, where people who were, pro-Russian were locked in a building and burned alive while the police and the fire department watched, and 39 people were massacred this way, burnt alive. And, outside you have the Ukrainian nationalists, pro-Nazi forces cheering on and treating it like a cookout or something, like this is, a wonderful, great occasion. Look at this wonderful, good thing that we've done. And they saw that in Eastern Ukraine. So people took up arms, whatever they could find, old hunting rifles, pitchforks, and whatever they found out in the barn. And they stared down at actual military. They went and confronted guys in tanks who wanted to come take over these areas by force. And they saw what happened in Odessa and said, no, thank you. We're going to take it from here. We're going to go in a different direction. And these people declared independence in Donetsk and Lugansk. They said, we are no longer part of Ukraine because we've seen what's happening in Ukraine. We don't want any part of it. And to me, this was kind of the beginning of the end of the unraveling of the Ukrainian experiment, because Ukraine is less of a coherent country or entity to me than it is kind of an experiment about coexistence between East and West. And the idea that the Russian side had for Ukraine was always that this was going to be kind of a buffer zone. This was going to be our, in-between zone that kind of protects us from the West, protects the West from us. We just have kind of this neutral, non-NATO state that's in the middle that isn't, actively engaged in hostilities. That was always the ideal that the Russian side publicly said that they had for Ukraine. They want a Ukraine that is not a member of NATO and that is neutral. And of course, now it is not. And since 2014, that's been made abundantly clear that even though it's not legally a member of NATO, it is a de facto member of NATO, not de jure, but de facto it is a member of NATO because it's stuffed to the brim with NATO weaponry, NATO military advisors, huge segments of the Ukrainian military are being sent to major NATO powers to train with troops there and to be told how to carry out this kind of anti-Russian proxy war. They are being fed intelligence directly by the CIA, by the NSA, by the United States, by UK intelligence as well, giving them targeting information. They'll tell them, oh, the Russians are over here. Oh, this individual Russian political figure or military figure is here. They basically are using the Ukrainian people as kind of pawns in this broader proxy war against Russia that's been in the works now for many years, as I said, not just since February 24th, 2022. And now we know that, right? We know that the Ukrainian side and the European side never really had any intention of doing anything else. This was always kind of the plan. We know that. Why? Well, because just last week, in an interview with a German newspaper, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel revealed that the Minsk agreements, Minsk I and Minsk II, in which the Ukrainians and the pro-Russian separatists basically achieved a peace deal that was mediated with Western countries, including the UK, France, and Germany, I believe, and Russia as well, had all these countries as guarantors. Now she revealed that basically the West never had any intention of honoring these agreements. She said that the Minsk agreements were, quote, an attempt to give Ukraine time, and that it was used by Kiev to become stronger. And this was interpreted with a great deal of alarm by Russian political figures, especially President Putin. He said that her remarks were, quote, completely unexpected and disappointing. He said, quote, it appears to me that nobody planned to live up to these Minsk agreements. They, the West, lied to us. And the only reason for these processes was to pump Ukraine up with weapons and get it ready for military action. Well, we can see that. Maybe we were too late to realize what was happening. Maybe this should have been started earlier. By this, of course, he means military hostilities what they refer to as the special military operation. And a lot of pro-Russian commentators certainly are inclined to agree. They say basically that the main takeaway from these comments is that Russia should have done this in 2014. They should not have gone along with these peace agreements, because now Angela Merkel is admitting that they were not real peace agreements. They were only an effort to give the Ukrainians time so that they could basically become a de facto NATO outpost, a de facto anti-Russia that's going to be used, weaponized against Russia in exactly this kind of military conflict.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's a pretty breathtaking admission by Merkel. Even if many people suspected this, it's different to actually hear them say it forthright that this was all just a stall tactic. And it kind of also you add this on top of the fact that there was a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. I guess Zelensky and Putin through back channels or other channels. There was one that was going to be signed in April, and Boris Johnson, as a representative of the UK and the US, went to Zelensky, went to Ukraine and said, if you sign this thing, you will not have any backers in the West. Basically, your entire support will be gone, and told him to end the peace talks. So we have the proof that the US and UK do not want this war to end. They just want it to drag on, and no matter how many Ukrainians die in the process.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. And I think, I believe his exact words were something like, Ukraine may be ready for peace talks, but the UK is not. And that kind of communicates to you really the relationship here, which is, it's so funny because constantly you'll hear things from Biden where he's talking about, oh, well, we're not going to push the Ukrainians to negotiate. That's a decision for the Ukrainians. When the shoe's on the other foot, it's always, oh, well, that's something for them to decide. How it would be colonialist of us to impose some kind of solution on them. And this is the rhetoric that you hear from, AOC and the squad about this, is that it's, for us to suggest peace in this proxy war, that's colonialism now. But you're right, though. This proves more or less that peace is almost impossible. Certainly from a Russian perspective, why would they be willing to enter a peace deal with the West, knowing that at any moment they'll dissolve it, knowing that they might, they may well never have had any intention of honoring it. It's like all these agreements that Russia has forged or had forged with the West, the Interballistic Missile Treaty, New START, all these arms limitation treaties that were just kind of unilaterally scrapped over the past few years. They all point from the Russian perspective into the idea that basically the West has no intention of honoring any agreements with us. And so now we find ourselves in this position where there really is no alternative. We're just going to facing like basically an interminable proxy war that's just going to end in total military victory or in defeat for one side or the other. My personal suspicion is that, given the way the war is going right now, that the Russians will be victorious, especially given what we're seeing right now in Bakhmut, or Artemovsk, as the Russians would say. Bakhmut, they say in the West. That now Western media is acknowledging is just a total meat grinder. The Russian sides estimate that the Ukrainians have lost 10,000 soldiers at least killed, not counting just casualties, wounded, or run away. Just in this one, battle alone, we obviously the Ukrainians don't admit that. I think at this point they're saying that they've only lost like 10,000 troops killed in this entire military conflict. Obviously a lie. Even the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen admitted last week in a video, which she subsequently deleted, edited, removed the remarks, and then re-uploaded. She said that Russians have killed over 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and that's insane. When you think of if they've killed 100,000 soldiers, well, they've probably wounded 2 or 3 times more, captured as many. How many desertions? We're talking about close to 500,000 casualties, right? When you kind of suss out those numbers, what would that mean? If 100,000 have been killed, how many more, have just been wounded?
Right.
It's
Yeah, I talked
jaw-dropping.
I talked to Scott Ritter a couple of weeks ago on here, and he said that Russia has shifted now from the kind of game plan that they thought was going to be a fairly quick victory, and now it's turned into a grind them down. But Russia is certainly capable of that. They have the more people, the more weaponry, the more money. So,
right, and that's what Bakhmut is right now. That's what Artemovsk is right now. It's a big meat grinder, and over the past 2 years, 2 weeks, you started to see the mainstream media use this phrase, meat grinder. It's popped up in a bunch of different articles. I think AP, CNN. And it's kind of an interesting shift in rhetoric that I think is pretty symbolic because, just a couple months ago, there was an article in the Washington Post that's kind of typical of mainstream media coverage. That the headline here is, "In bloody battle for Bakhmut, Russian mercenaries eye a symbolic prize." So they're referring to Bakhmut as symbolic now. Because you get a sense, the tides are turning. Well, we want to kind of create this narrative going into that. This is, if they lose Bakhmut, it's not a big deal, right?
Right.
They said, I'll read a couple quotes from this article, this Washington Post article. They said, quote, "In this fight for control of a shattered city, military experts say the ambitions of a Russian oligarch, Yevgeny Prigozhin, founder of the Wagner mercenary group, may have eclipsed all strategic logic." They went on to say that, quote, "The battle for Bakhmut is no longer part of any coordinated military operation. Instead, Prigozhin is pouring waves of mercenaries from Wagner into battle, appearing to see political advantage in capturing Bakhmut as a military trophy." And so you see here, this was the Washington Post, and I guess I want to counterpose this with a more realistic appraisal that I saw from the Associated Press, that in an article they released in October, admitting, quote, that taking Bakhmut would rupture Ukraine's supply lines and open a route for Russian forces to press on towards Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, key Ukrainian strongholds in Donetsk province. Now that is true. This is not a symbolic city.
Right.
There are 7 major roads leaving this city. It's an important, from a strategic perspective. Slavyansk is very important from a strategic perspective to have a new front open up there. Once the Russians liberate Slavyansk, then people in Donetsk can have running water again. So there are kind of a lot of military and civil considerations that are going into this necessity for Bakhmut. It's not a military trophy, but you see all this, the mainstream media spin machine moving into action, where they basically, any victory for Russia is not really a victory, it's a Pyrrhic victory, and then they frame. It's this constant projection where anything that's happening to the Ukrainian side is actually happening to the Russian side.
Well, and also they want everyone to believe that one day Russia's getting defeated, they're going to lose, they're getting destroyed, and the next day Russia's going to take over all of Europe. And it's like, how can it be both?
Yeah, right. And that it's BS. Because if Europeans, the Europeans are now, various European governments saying we're basically out of weapons, right? We have shipped all of our weapons to the Ukrainians. Would they have done that if they actually thought that they were about to get invaded by Vladimir Putin?
And you have CBS and CNN, before they were forced to change their reporting, saying that up to 70% of the weapons are not getting to the front lines because they get sold on the black market or whatever else. And then
they had to apologize for telling the truth, right? They took that down and we're sorry.
I know you have to go a few minutes early, so I wanted to get to this one other thing before you have to leave. I wanted to know if you had any input on Pablo Gonzalez, who's a fellow journalist who was arrested in Poland, and I think people haven't heard much from him. And he was a fellow hit lister, with you.
Yeah, no, I don't have any updates on him. I mean, as far as I'm aware, his detention continues. Detained for telling the truth, for basically showing what the West doesn't want shown. He's been locked up for months and months since basically the initiation of hostilities. I think right around February or March, he was locked up almost immediately. This is a Basque dude. He's, if people call him Spanish, I think he might object to that, just because a lot
Right,
of a lot of Basque people
right.
tend to. But certainly the Spanish government hasn't been really doing any favors for him, or pressuring the Ukrainian or the Polish side in any meaningful way, as far as I can tell. The only people doing it are other journalists, his friends and family, and just normal citizens who are kind of outraged that the West, while we claim to be this kind of beacon of democracy, human rights, freedom, all these things that supposedly we're fighting against the autocratic East to defend. Well, all the people who are saying maybe we should live up to those values if we're going to fight a huge proxy war ostensibly on this basis, those are the only people really pressuring for Gonzalez's release. Sadly, I wish that I had a little bit more optimism about that case, but the way things are going right now, and as we discussed, just kind of, it looks like this is going to stretch on for months, if not years at this point. I don't really have a whole lot of hope that he'll be able to get out anytime soon, sadly.
Yeah, it's a scary time to be a journalist. Another place that you see all this propaganda is they love running stories about how Russia detains journalists, or is anti-journalist, and yet you have you being targeted, you have Julian Assange being locked up and essentially tortured for 9-10 years now. How does it feel being a journalist out there, and what are you up to next in these last few minutes we have?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? I met in Moscow a ton of different figures who, well, not I didn't meet a ton of them, but I met several. But I know of kind of a ton of different people who basically have to seek political asylum in Russia. You know what I mean? The so-called West is, they're getting the Assange treatment. I met a crypto guy at kind of an expat bar who was on the FBI most wanted list because they accused him of trying to help the North Koreans circumvent sanctions. He's British, that's an
Right.
American law. Even still, when he was flying through Saudi Arabia, because he attended some crypto conference in Pyongyang at some point, when he was flying, the Americans basically said, okay, we're gonna try to lock up everyone who was involved with this, even though they didn't really say anything interesting, or it was basically just a very entry level conference that certainly nothing that you can't find on Google was said. But I guess as a symbolic move, the United States decided to try to charge all these people with breaking American laws, whether or not they're Americans or not. So this guy that I met, Chris Ems, he had been locked up for 8 months in a Saudi prison that he had just been detained while flying through Riyadh on a U.S. Warrant, and they kept him locked up for months and months and months. He was only able to get released, reportedly due to some pressure from friends, and I think from some folks on the Russian side, who basically said, to the Saudis, like, you can't just lock this guy up indefinitely for violating laws that don't even apply to him. And so now he's basically, a political prisoner in Russia. And I don't think this is an isolated case. Sadly, I think this is just kind of going to become the norm. He's going through what Edward Snowden went through, basically
Yeah.
for having refused to obey some U.S. dictate. Now he's just unable to travel freely throughout the world, and he has to look over his shoulder all the time. And I think this is the direction that we're heading. Unfortunately, it seems, really that these promises that we have in the West, are now basically being seen as equally as expendable as the lives of Ukrainians who are all being chomped up in this big proxy war.
Well, Wyatt, thanks so much, and I'm glad you're doing all right, and thanks for all your reporting. And I'm sorry you got to go a few minutes early, but how can people keep following your work?
Absolutely. Thanks for so much for having me on, first of all, Lee, and
Yeah.
good to see you too. If viewers want to follow along, check out my work on Twitter. You have to type in @WyattReed13, this little name right here. If you search my name on Twitter, I won't show up. I'm shadow banned. I'm search banned because I'm quote unquote Russian state affiliated media. So you have to go directly to this name and type enter @WyattReed13. You can also find me on Telegram. Just type in Wyatt Reed and you'll find my channel. And I'm also working on a new podcast that's called Decentral Intelligence. You can type that in DISSENTRAL Intelligence, Decentral. So those are our new projects coming out, and very much appreciate anyone who wants to follow along. Give us a like and a follow. Thanks so much. And thank you, Lee, for having us or having me on to discuss this. It's really important, and not enough attention being paid to this, certainly.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Wyatt. Glad you're doing well, and it's good to hear your voice. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Take care. All right, everybody. Wyatt Reed. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you've been enjoying these this ongoing series that I've been having of interviews, 2 every week. As you'll see on the screen now, this whole venture behind the headlines, most censored news that I do. It's all with Mint Press, but it is completely funded by people like you. So if you feel like you got a couple of dollars out of this, please become a member. Patreon.com/behind the headlines. Tomorrow, I will be talking to Vijay Prashad. A lot of people are big fans of his. He is a well-known writer, speaker, philosopher, and plenty of other things, journalist. So, yeah, don't miss that one tomorrow, noon Eastern, I believe, right here at youtube.com/behind the headlines. Even if you can't become a member on Patreon, I hope you will click subscribe, and you got to click the bell next to subscribe so that they will actually alert you to when we have a new video. That's how you can find out about our videos each and every week. And the new Most Censored News comes out tomorrow as well on that same channel, youtube.com/behind the headlines. All right. Thanks again. And keep fighting.